Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Nicholas Richardson. This is the news. In an address to the nation, Vladimir Putin announced a partial mobilization in Russia. 300,000 people with combat experience will be conscripted. The president of Russia said that the West had turned Ukraine into a springboard for Russophobia, and that this is how he justified the decision to carry out a preemptive military operation. Meanwhile, the president of Ukraine called for support for the armed forces of Ukraine and all services that are gradually restoring the country's territorial integrity. The announcement of general conscription is Moscow's reaction to the high personnel losses incurred in Ukraine. Since February, the Russians have lost over 55,000 soldiers there. The detailed decree on the declaration of partial mobilization in the Russian Federation, published today by the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, brings Russia into a new phase of the war in Ukraine. Decree on the declaration of partial mobilization in the Russian Federation. By this decree, I decide. Partial mobilization in the Russian Federation has been in force since the 21st of September 2022. The necessary measures are taken to meet the needs of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, other troops, formations and military bodies during the period of the partial mobilization. It guarantees for military service for the mobilization of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the number and on the date specified by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. The Kremlin plans to join the occupied territories of Ukraine to Russia under a referendum which is to be held this week. According to experts from the United States Institute of War Studies, Moscow is planning to falsify the voting results so that attempts by Ukrainians to regain the lost territories will be treated as an attack on Russia. Moreover, the support of Kiev by Western partners will be considered an attack on Russia's sovereignty. If the territorial integrity of Russia is threatened, then we will undoubtedly use all available means to protect our country and our citizens. This is not a bluff. And those who try to blackmail us with nuclear weapons should know that such a policy can also turn against them. Even though the conscription of another 300,000 soldiers to the Russian army poses a threat to independent Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky is still cool-headed. Publishing this information is deliberate to cause chaos. Are there some that were not known to us before? My position is clear and unchanging. We need military support for our armed forces, and we appreciate the help our partners have provided to us so far. The announcement of mobilization caused anxiety among Russians. Within a few minutes, all air tickets were purchased for connections from Moscow to Armenia, Turkey and Georgia. We don't hear of there being any politicians in Russia who obviously have any power to carry out such an idea of ending this war. This morning, Russian activists announced a protest against recruitment. The organisers called on the Russians to demonstrate in all cities of the country. The action will start at 7 p.m. local time. Mobilization is like pregnancy. You cannot be partially in it. So we have a mobilization of reservists in Russia. Industrial mobilization has already taken place. Only in terms of losses, the Russians crossed the Rubicon. Too little, too late. It seems to me that now Russia is indeed going to war. 300,000 people is more than were stationed at the border with Ukraine on the 24th of February. Meanwhile, yesterday, during the United Nations General Assembly in New York, President Andrzej Duda drew attention to the scale of Russian terror that Ukrainians are facing. According to the president, Moscow discouraged many business partners from any kind of business by causing the war in Ukraine. There is no more room for business as usual with Russia. The days of business as usual are definitely over. They were ended by Russia through its bestial aggression against Ukraine, through its violation of the principles of international law, through its disregard for human beings and for human life. The war crimes committed by the Russians during the invasion of Ukraine are yet another point that aggravates the already damaged diplomatic relations with Moscow. Top world leaders commented on the current events in Ukraine during yesterday's United Nations General Assembly. If we want this war to end, we cannot remain indifferent. Putin will give up his military actions and his imperialist ambitions only when he realizes that he will not be able to win. He not only destroys Ukraine, but also ruins his own country. We will not accept any peace dictated by Russia. The invasion of Ukraine violates the values and rules on which, for decades, international security and the civil coexistence between countries have rested. We thought we would no longer have to witness wars of aggression in Europe. Imperial ambitions, militarism, systematic violations of civil and human rights seemed to belong to the last century. Information about the mobilization of recruits for the Russian army has reached the inhabitants of the regions located on the front line. Our correspondent, Vital Nevelich, is staying in Mykolaiv. Information about mobilization does not impress the inhabitants of Mykolaiv, perhaps because they have already experienced so much. Last week, 440 graves of victims of Russian terror were found in the city of Izium. The accounts of the survivors are harrowing. I spent 2 weeks in prison. At some point they had already stopped beating me. They tortured me with electricity. I had 2 clamps put on my fingers, and with each shock, I felt a strong shock. In the past week in the Kharkiv region, as many as 10 Russian execution houses were discovered. Local people were interrogated in the detention centres. The cemetery near Izium shows the aftermath of Russian bestiality. Several thousand Polish, American and British soldiers are taking part in the Niedźwiedź 22 exercises in the Podkarpacia region. Deputy Prime Minister Mariusz Błaszczak said that these are the most important manoeuvres this year and will test the interoperability of the 18th Mechanised Division, which will receive Abrams tanks and Apache helicopters. Today, the manoeuvres were also observed by Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki. The main task of the manoeuvres is to train the newly created 18th Mechanised Division, named after General Tadeusz Buk, known as the Iron One. American and British troops are also taking part in the exercises. New creation, new vision, new unit, new command standards. This division will be the first to be created, so to speak, on the model of the United States Army units. Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, who was observing the manoeuvres closely, emphasised that Poland is a member of the strongest alliance in the world, and today's exercises show that the Polish army is prepared for any eventuality. Today is a test of the Polish army, which partially donates its equipment that proves itself on the battlefield. And this verification passes, but we also have plans to purchase the most modern equipment. Yesterday, Deputy Prime Minister Mariusz Błaszczak was also present in Nowa Dęba. The Minister of National Defence emphasised that the Polish army is undergoing modernisation, which will increase the security of the country. The most effective response to the threats is strengthening the forces of the Polish army, building the strength of the Polish army. This is happening by increasing the numbers of the Polish army, by establishing new units, equipping the Polish army with modern weapons, and by building interoperability. The government has been rearming the army for several months. Poland has signed contracts for the purchase of, among others, 250 Abrams tanks, 500 HIMARS, and 24 Bayraktar drones. Yesterday, former President Bronisław Komorowski criticised the method of modernising the Polish army. The most important task is to abandon this disastrous practice of first spending huge money or taking on huge commitments and only then planning. Only then do they make it into something, into a system. POPSL that military units were liquidated as recently as 2011. This practice affected, inter alia, a regiment in Suwałki, a division in Legionowo, a brigade in Lublin, and a battalion in Sielce. The decision to create the 18th Mechanised Division was made by Minister of National Defence Mariusz Błaszczak in 2018. Last year, it reached full combat readiness. According to the plan of the Polish government, the Iron Division is a key element of the defence of the so-called Eastern Wall. Protests continue in Iran following the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who fell into a coma and died after being arrested by the Iranian morality police. The reason for the arrest was insufficient head cover. In response, Iranian women publicly cut their hair and burnt their hijabs. The protests have seen women remove their hijabs, dance and burn their head coverings in public places. Mahsa Amini was detained by Iran's morality police last week in connection with a head covering that officers said insufficiently covered her hair. After being detained, the woman fell into a coma and died in hospital. Protests began outside a hospital in Tehran on Friday, shortly after the 22-year-old's death was confirmed. Her family members accused police of violence against the young woman, while Iranian authorities pointed to her illness. According to Mahsa's family, she did not suffer from any medical condition. Under Iranian Islamic Sharia law, imposed after the 1979 revolution, women are required to cover their hair and wear long, loose clothing to conceal their figures. Violators face public admonishment, fines, or time in jail. That's the news. Thank you for watching. Stay with us for the weather, Poland Daily Business, and more programmes. But from me, it's have a good night and a better tomorrow.